All pledge allegiance.
Ms. Shatner?
Here.
Mr. Sullivan?
Here.
Ms. Cavanis? Here. Mr. Parker is absent today. Mr. Walker? Absent. Mr. Knudsen?
Here.
Ms. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Shoemaker?
Here.
And Chair Drury.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Do pledge allegiance.
I just got comfortable.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so the first thing on our agenda is public comment. Members of the public are welcome to comment on items on the agenda or off the agenda. Any public comments today? Okay, not seeing any. We'll go right into minutes of the board meeting of June 21st. Are any corrections requested? Changes?
Mr. Chairman, I move the consent agenda. I'll second.
Okay, will be approved by consensus. Yeah. Okay, then we're on the consent calendar, which is the June 2017 retirement report, along with the quarterly trustee education and training report.
I thought I moved the consent.
Oh,
agenda.
well, yeah, we were just doing the minutes.
I had the minutes,
Okay,
okay.
okay, so is that your motion for the
That was the
consent?
motion, yeah.
And your second for the consent? Okay, any discussion on the consent? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, question for the board and the chair. In the future, would you prefer the minutes be on the consent calendar, or do they need to be a separate item?
I would prefer it on the consent.
Yeah, because we can always pull it if there's
Mhm.
something to change.
If
So
someone has a problem that we can get into Judy or to you ahead of time, and it sort of cuts down.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay, so noted.
Okay, so now we're on discussion possible action regarding the investment matters, monthly investment report.
Yeah, make her sit up there. I know she doesn't want to, but
I'm gonna make Elena present this whole thing. Expert on securities lending. Okay, so we have a few things to talk to you about today. We mentioned the monthly performance report. We'll go through that. We also had the last of our searches we've been doing. We decided to take a look at and invest in a equal-weighted S&P 500 index fund, and also take a look at the market cap-weighted S&P 500 index fund. So we have recommendations for you with that. But before we get into that, we thought we'd do an education session on something called securities lending. And this came up because when we were looking at the S&P 500 index funds, you can invest in funds that have securities lending or invest in funds that don't have securities lending. So when James and Stan and I and Alina were all talking about this, we thought, well, maybe we should do some educational session, let you know what it is, so that you would be able to have an informed decision about whether or not you want to be in a fund with lending or not. At the end of the day, we're going to recommend that you don't go into a lending fund. So this is going to be more educational. I think it's interesting stuff, but we're not going to recommend that you do it right away. So, make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Very much.
Okay, great. So I have a presentation here. We'll flip ahead to what's on page 3 here.
Are we gonna go up to this?
yes.
I see it's also in our packet. It's the
Okay.
second item after the monthly report.
Okay, great. And here we'll just spend a little bit of time letting you know what securities lending is. And we spent a lot of time with clients on this topic back in 2008 and 2009. It was a big topic, and a lot of people didn't realize one of their largest investment managers was their custodian, who was lending securities for the plans. Like, people didn't know that They had this operating situation going on. And in the financial crisis, I'll get into this in a few more pages, the cash collateral that was used to back securities out on loan, some of them were invested in mortgage securities and asset-backed securities that became illiquid and went down in value. And that locked up the liquidity of these securities lending programs, and all of a sudden there was this huge headache of this manager you didn't even know you really had, and all you were trying to do was pick up a couple basis points.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of the history lesson. But here on page 3, we're outlining a few things that what we believe, and this is what Callan believes, is that securities lending is an important function within the capital markets. It does serve an important role. So you shouldn't be, as an industry, we shouldn't be adverse to securities lending. It actually does good things for the capital markets. We do believe that it needs to be done, if you do go into securities lending, that it needs to be with a focus of risk control, as opposed to eking out the last little basis point you can through this activity. The financial crisis exposed that securities lending is a couple things. One is you make money by lending a security, and then the other is the cash collateral reinvestment. And there's certain asymmetric risk that you're exposed to if you lend securities. Asymmetric risk means that you might make up this much, but if things go bad, you lose that much, right? And the person who lends the securities for you always makes a little bit of money, but they don't bear the losses. You bear the losses if losses do occur. So we really want to focus on risk control if you do have a lending program. The way you're structured, you don't have an overt lending program with your custodian because you invest only in funds. Now, having said that, in a few pages we'll take a look, and some of your funds do lend securities, but they do so at a de minimis level. So on page 4, what is securities lending? Securities lending is a market practice where securities are temporarily borrowed by one party from another. So in your situation, you're a long-term investor with assets held in S&P 500 index funds. You're not going to be selling those investments. You're always going to be having your exposure to ExxonMobil or whoever it might be. Other people want to temporarily have access to that security for one reason or the other. You have the ability to lend them that security, and then they give you cash collateral back for that security, and then they go out and do something with it. The people who borrow the security tend to be hedge funds or other securities that need to cover a position, so broker-dealers might need it, for example. I'll go into that in a little more detail. When you lend a security, it's out for a certain time period, and as I said, people give you back collateral so that you are protected if you do lend security. So for U.S. securities, for example, if someone borrows GE stock from you worth $100, the person borrowing it will give you $102 in case that something happens to that security while it's out on loan. Okay, so it's a collateralized loan in that regard. The collateral they give to you tends to be cash or government securities, letters of credit. And in securities lending programs, you can control exactly what that collateral is in the agreement. You have an agent who lends securities for you, and as I said, that agent needs to be paid for doing what they do. And what they do is they take a percent of the income that you earn, the extra income you get from lending a security. And a revenue split tends to be 50-50. For the index funds we're looking at today, the revenue split is 50-50 in most of the cases. On page 5, to give you a sense of the size and the size of the market and who does the lending, on the right you'll see the size of the market, and you have in that 2008 time period, you'll see that there used to be about $1.7 trillion out on loan, securities, $1.7 trillion worth of securities out on loan in the US market. After the financial crisis, you'll see that drop down to under $1 trillion. So after the financial crisis, a lot of index funds really reined in their securities lending activity, and you see that a lot of the securities on loan came out of the market. Globally, it was approaching 4 trillion, and now it's running around 2 trillion in size. Who are the entities that lend the securities? Actually doing the lending, not the borrowing. Those are the people over on the left. You'll see mutual funds. And then retirement and pension plans, you'll see those long-term institutional investors. They're the ones that do most of the lending. And that ratio really hasn't changed dramatically. Okay, and on page 6, we have a bit of a schematic to try to explain how a securities lending program does work, whether it's within a fund or it's done by a custodian. You have a lender, so in this situation, let's say a pension fund, an investment fund, pension fund, insurance company. They contract with a lending agent. A lot of times that's your custodian, so State Street in your situation, or an investment manager. And they have a master agreement with someone who wants to go out and borrow securities on your behalf. So that's another bank, a broker-dealer, or some form of market maker. And they have end clients, whether it's another mutual fund, a broker-dealer, or most likely a hedge fund. There's an agreement between these two parties. The lender lets the security be lent to the borrower. The borrower in return gives that 102% capital back to the lender. All corporate actions, dividends, incomes goes to the lender, and the lender gets a fee back in return. Okay, so these are all the parties associated with a securities lending income. So prior to 2008, there were, let me start that thought process. There are two ways you make money by lending income, lending securities. The first is by just the intrinsic value of a security. Sometimes a security, people really want to borrow a security. They really want to borrow that for some reason. And you can make a little bit of money just by that intrinsic value of lending them a security that is really in high demand. So we call that intrinsic value or demand spread. The other way to make money in securities lending is by lending a security. It may not be in high demand, but someone gives you back that 102% cash collateral, and then you go out and you buy bonds, and you make extra income on that. So that's reinvestment spread. That's what we're calling reinvestment spread. Prior to 2008, most people were trying to make money on reinvestment spread. That was the main source of return. But that didn't turn out too well when the bonds they were buying weren't money good all the time and weren't 100% liquid. Since 2008, the whole market has changed. It said, okay, when I lend, I just want to make money based on the intrinsic value of that security, that people really, really want to borrow it from me. There's a de-emphasis now on reinvestment spread, making money off of the bond cash collateral. And that fits philosophically where we think programs should be. So on page 8, why should you lend? Why would a program like yours set up a lending program? Well, you can make a little bit of income. You can make a couple basis points on your investments. In theory, if you lent out all $400 million that you have, and you made a couple basis points on that, that's real money. In practice, you couldn't go out and lend nor would you want to go out and lend all of that. In today's situation, we're talking about a couple $30 million allocations, and you might be able to make 1 or 2 basis points on that $30 million allocation. So in this scenario, where it's $30 million, you make a basis point or 2, is probably not worth it. That's our conclusion at the end of the day. But let's say you were CalPERS or CalSTRS and you had $100 billion out on loan, and you can make a few basis points on that. That's actually real money. That starts to be real money. So why do people borrow? So I haven't really explained that yet. Who are these people we're helping, and why are they willing to give us extra money? Well, there are a couple scenarios. One is if you're dealing with if a broker-dealer was looking to buy or sell a security and they had a failed trade, which can happen from time to time. That broker-dealer needs to deliver a security to someone they promised to give the security to, and they don't have it in their inventory. They need to get it. They have a contractual obligation to give someone the security. And oh my God, we don't have that. They go out and they borrow it. They'll go out and borrow it from you and pay you a little extra money instead of letting the trade fail. So some broker-dealers need that. It's not a real common thing, but it does happen, and that's one of the good industry-wide things that comes about from securities lending. Okay, it prevents failed trades for other people. And because you're preventing failed trades for other people, you get that little extra income back from them. So that's one main category of why people would borrow a security from you. The other is hedge funds. You ever wonder how does someone actually short a security? So you know what shorting is, right? Shorting is when you go out and you sell something you don't own because you think the price is going to go down. So hedge funds do that all the time, right? They go out and they sell securities that they don't own. Well, the way they do it is actually by going out and borrowing the security and literally selling it, and then promising to give you the security back in the future. So securities lending, and their agents in between, it's not you literally giving a hedge fund your securities. There are agents in between. They give you the 102% collateral. But that's how hedge funds actually get access to being able to short securities. That's probably good for the industry in the long run because it does serve to facilitate price discovery, right? I mean, that's if people think the price of something should be lower and there's no way for the market to express that, absent no one wanting to buy it, the other way is for people actually go on to sell the security to put it at the price level that they think is efficient. So those are a couple of the kind of main reasons people would borrow a security from you. Okay. There certainly are risks to engaging in securities lending. The number one risk is that you lend someone security and they don't give it back to you because they go bankrupt, they default. So the way you protect yourself from that risk, and I'm on page 9 now, is they over-collateralize the value of the loan. So if something's worth $100 and they give you $102, if they don't give you back the security, you have their $102. That's what protects you. And that relationship should be marked to market on a daily basis. So if the security goes up in value, then they need to give you more collateral back. So that's how you protect yourself from default risk. The other risk is what we alluded to earlier, the collateral reinvestment risk. What do you do with that $102 while it's in your hands if you buy bonds that go down in value or become illiquid And if someone returns the security to you, you need to give them the $100 back, right? And if the bonds aren't liquid to give them the $102 back, then it can become problematic. There's certainly operational risks. That's borne by the lending agent, that entity that you hired, so it would be your custodian, most likely. And then there's trade settlement risk, and then country and currency risk if you're lending international securities. So it's not a free lunch. You know, this extra little bit of income you get, there are risks associated with it. On page 11, we talked a little bit about the global financial crisis, and there certainly were lawsuits that came about because of securities lending programs that didn't go well, and it affected a number of the banks. Here we're listing lawsuits and settlements for 5 of the banks. Northern Trust in particular had a tough time with their securities lending program. BNY Mellon paid $280 million for losses stemming from securities lending. State Street also had payments.
So what was happening?
So what was happening back then? So
No, why the lawsuits and why were they held responsible?
well, they would argue that they breached their fiduciary duty of managing assets in a prudent manner when they had their securities out on loan, or they so it was the cash collateral reinvestment problem. And so some of these banks, the cash collateral proved to be not liquid. They couldn't get their money back. And there were losses. And if you're an investor in something that should be a very low risk strategy, and you don't have liquidity, and you lost 10% of the value, lawsuits ensued, said you breached your fiduciary responsibility, you didn't follow guidelines, whatever the argument might be about that specific investment program. And these lawsuits could go on for a long time. You could argue whether or not they actually breached, but what certainly occurred is it didn't meet the expectations of the spirit of the expectations of investors had with it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we're going to dovetail on that. Having had very personal experience with 2 different funds with the SEC lending losses, it was the kind of thing where the investor, so the fund takes all of the risk on the cash collateral side of things, but the securities lending agent is taking all of the risk on the trade side. So if you have a trade fail because you have securities out on risk, your securities lending agent has to make that right for you. That's the risk they're bearing in these transactions. But the underlying investor, the fund, bears all of the risk on the cash collateral reinvestment. And it was not, those funds prior to 2007-8 timeframe, they were not invested in what you would think of as a cash type of manner. They were pushing out duration to the 3-year type horizon to pick up a little bit more return from the securities lending, from the duration play. But, it was such a disruptive time. I mean, left work on a Friday evening in September of 2008, thinking everything was fine. When I got to work on Monday morning, had a $30 million hole in our SEC lending portfolio because we owned Lehman Brothers bonds in that portfolio that were, at that point, significantly impaired. They still have a little bit of value, but it was pennies on the dollar. And that was kind of the first event that really brought it to the forefront of a lot of investors' minds of, oh my gosh, we're bearing all this risk. And we thought we were just managing cash and didn't realize we were going out a lot farther than what we were. So, and having been through a lot of the documents, the settlements that Greg is talking about here, I would characterize as much more likely it was a settlement to put it behind the securities lending agents rather than they really feel like they breached their duty under the contracts.
Yeah, it became a business decision.
Yeah.
So imagine in your situation, you know, you go to your custodian, you say, you lost me how much overnight? And either you're gonna lose all your clients or you're gonna do something. And you know, also thinking back to the financial crisis, it's amazing what we lived through in that time period. And you had all these things out on loan and the cash collateral went away and people start calling back the securities. The whole financial market just seizes up. It had, you know, the web of interconnectedness just became really exposed. And it, you know, even goes down and then all these counterparties are exposed to each other. And it takes a long, long time to unravel that web.
So what was the result?
Eventually, well, one of the funds I left before it was resolved, but at the other fund, ended up in bankruptcy, getting pennies on the dollar, and then I left there before the settlement of the lawsuit. So, yeah.
I was
It's
new to the CalSTRS
pennies on the
report
dollar.
and watched $30 billion disappear literally within a day,
Wow.
2 days. Yeah.
Well, so it was a painful experience for many people. So what did people do on page 12? Some people just shut down their programs altogether. So we saw how the amount of securities out on loan has come down a lot since 2008. Best examples where people said, okay, this is asymmetric risk for me. I have no interest whatsoever. And then other investors decided to de-risk and then focused on really the intrinsic value of lending and having cash collateral in treasuries and governments only, right? And not buying Lehman bonds, not buying anything else that's just the extra spread risk. So that's, people de-risked the program to make them more conservative. Okay? So, we're looking at index fund searches for you today, and we have the option to go into securities lending fund or non-securities lending fund. Truth be told, you already are in lending funds, but to a de minimis level. At this point, we don't think it's really worth the additional reward you could get on, you know, a basis point on a $30 million investment for the extra level of complexity. That's our opinion, but you can go through and think about the risk tolerance, decide is it worth it. So those are kind of the decision variables there. So I mentioned on 15 that you already are in funds that have the ability to lend. So you invest in mutual funds and commingled funds. All of those funds are governed by their prospectus or trust documents. So they don't look to you for their guidelines. You look at their prospectus and decide whether or not you want to be in a fund with those parameters. Almost all mutual funds are written in a way by their lawyers that gives them broad latitude and to do things, so that they're never in a position where they accidentally violated their prospectus or any of their guidelines, right? So almost every fund out there says, yeah, we can lend securities if we want to, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen 4 years from now. Maybe we want to lend or don't want to lend, and I'm not going to redo all the legal documents to let me do it. So on page 15, we list all of your fund investments, And you'll see that all but 2 of them have the ability to lend. Okay? But that doesn't mean they do lend, right? It just means they have the ability to do it. So if it has an L along here, it means they lend, and L means they don't lend. And just the Oakmark Fund, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. If L means they can lend, and L means they cannot lend by their governing documents. So Boston Partners and Oakmark are the only ones that cannot lend. All the others say they can lend. But then over at the notes, you look at, okay, well, how much do they actually lend? So Vanguard, your current S&P 500 index fund has the ability to lend, but 6 basis points of it is actually out on loan. So the lending amount is beyond de minimis. Harbor Capital Appreciation has 1.3 basis points on loan. You'll see that a bunch of them have the ability to lend, and then none of it is out on loan. None of it at all is out on loan. Now, where you start having a little bit of exposure is the small cap funds, where they have 6% and 9% out on loan. And that's because within small cap, that's areas where hedge funds can affect prices more by shorting a security. A big hedge fund has to borrow a whole lot of Microsoft to actually move the price of that security. So functionally, they're not going to go out and borrow, $3 billion and short it, right? Yeah.
What is the de minimis percentage cap? Like, what is the most that they can borrow under the, or lend?
What's the most any of these funds could borrow? So de minimis is my word. That's not a legal term.
It's not a set.
It's not, yeah.
Because I do a lot of grant proposal work, and there is it's a 25%
Oh, is that right?
of the grant. So I was just wondering
Oh.
if there was something like that. In this, there isn't.
So, to your knowledge, do any of them have caps?
They all have 33 and a
That's-
third
that's-
percent cap.
And that's in the 40 Act.
Yes.
So 40 Act funds can lend 33 and a third percent. So 40 Act fund's a mutual fund.
When you say the hedge funds can affect the prices, the word manipulation comes up for me. Is this a form of price manipulation? Hedge funds can buy and borrow and affect the prices of stock.
Is price discovery. Manipulation is a loaded term, right?
Well, okay.
Right? So
Well, it's
your
just what
your
the
active
term that comes up.
managers, your active managers, these guys try to affect the price too, but they're just betting the opposite way.
Right.
They're saying, hedge fund, you're a fool. You think it's going down, I think I'm going up. I'm going to buy the security. You think it's going down, I disagree with you. So both of them are trying to manipulate the price of the security with it either going up or down.
Right, I guess I feel less manipulated. My stuff goes up. It
Yeah.
doesn't.
That's right.
Greg, I noticed that the neither bond fund is lending. Is that typical of bond funds?
It is. So bond funds can, in the bond market, you can short exposures through the use of derivatives. And you can get implicit lending earnings in other ways than through the lending market. So your manager, PIMCO in particular, has some of the reinvestment risk we've talked about with the securities lending agents, in that they'll go out and they'll buy treasury futures and back it with cash collateral. That's functionally a very similar thing that's going on with the securities lending program. But because you can buy and sell treasury futures, buy and sell credit default swaps, in the market in general, you don't need to go out and borrow a physical security to express a negative view on something. So that's why there's, lending in the bond market doesn't hurt as much. Okay? So that's a bit of an education for you to let you know why in this specific situation we're not recommending that you go into a lending fund. But I think it's good to know what lending is, and to get to know that it does occur in some of your funds, but the amount of lending is limited, it's prudent, and the rationale for lending is for intrinsic value as opposed to trying to create that extra spread. So we're comfortable with the way these funds operate.
Is there a typical time frame for these loans?
Some of them can be term and some can be open-ended.
I guess a functional question, so if you've got something that's worth 100, you loan it out for 102 collateral. You get to keep the 2. When they give it back to you.
You give them back the 102.
And they give it back to you and it's at 98? Or it's at 100, or what's its value when they give it back to you?
The security?
Yes.
Well, whatever happened to the security. So the security could go up in value, and they give it back to you, and it's up in value. If it went down in value, they're happy. If someone shorted it.
And you're not.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and it comes back to you. Now, if you didn't lend the security, that security would have gone down in value anyway.
They would have got it elsewhere.
Yeah, someone else would have gotten it in. And and it may not have gone down because one person was shorting it, right? It may have gone down because whatever that person who was shorting it, the insight they had would have affected the price anyway, right? So if you think someone's going to miss their earnings report, and you want to sell the security before, and then they miss and the price goes down, then you get the security back.
You said they give you 102, but when the deal is done, you give them back 102?
You give them back the 102.
Where do you make money then?
Well,
Just on the investment that you made off of that 102?
Well, either that, or there's an implied borrow rate within that 102, so maybe you give them back 101.5 or something like that. There's an implied borrowing rate within that.
I'm glad you're recommending we don't, because I would have hated to say vote no on something. Just out of the wood. But I would.
Speaking of, do we have to take a vote on it? Or is this just for,
On,
saying yes or no?
I don't believe we do.
No, this is just
Education
educational.
piece.
Yeah, just an educational piece.
So something you do need to take a vote on is the new index fund allocation. So, you know, we've done all this work on a structure analysis on every asset class, and within domestic equity, we made the decision to increase our exposure to passive funds, and we decided to split our exposure within passive funds to 2 types of index funds. One is a market cap weighted index benchmarked to the S&P 500. So that's the standard S&P 500 index fund we all hear about. The securities are weighted based on their issuance, how much market capitalization they have. The other type of index fund is an equal weighted index fund. So that's where the size of each security within the portfolio is just equal weighted. It's not based on their market value. So the 500th company in the S&P 500 gives you the same exposure as the first company. So it's a more broadly diversified form of an index fund. Okay. So the decision was made previously that we're going to put $30 million in a market cap weighted fund and $30 million in an equal weighted fund. Then you told Callan, hey, go out and do a search and bring back the providers. There are only a few providers in indexing, right? It's a business based on scale and cost. So we're talking to the Costcos of the world, right? These are, just who can do this the most competently at the lowest price is really the decision variables in going with an index fund. And there are other operational things that we should take a look at to make sure you can efficiently trade them and that sort of thing. So in the report that James pulled up, we went through and we highlighted 3 market cap weighted funds for you to consider, and then 2 equal weighted funds for you to consider. Now, you already have a market cap weighted index fund with Vanguard. So you already have exposure to that. And Vanguard is one of the funds that we identified as being appropriate for you. And the other 2 are BlackRock and State Street, the 2 biggest players in index fund land. So, James, I apologize. We don't have a page number. I don't even know what page to.
You want to go to
Yeah.
the summary table?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That just has the fees. There we go. Thank you. And here we have a grid that outlines the fees and size of the BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard funds. And you'll see that the funds for which you're eligible to invest, they all have the same all-in fee. All-in fee is a combination of their operating expenses plus their investment management fees. So their all-in fees are 4 basis points for every index fund you can pick. BlackRock and State Street are commingled funds. Vanguard is a 40 Act mutual fund. So given that you already have, and on top of that, this report shows the tracking error. In other words, it says, how good are they at managing an index fund? They all do, in my opinion, an equally fine job of tracking the index, which it shouldn't be surprising given who they are. So given that they're all the same fee and they all do an equally good job of replicating the index fund, I think you're perfectly fine just staying with who you're at right now in the Vanguard Mutual Fund. Any questions about the equal weighted, the market cap weighted index fund search? Okay. And then if you flip ahead to the summary matrix for the equal weighted index funds, you'll see there are only 2 providers here. Vanguard doesn't have an equal weighted index fund option. It's BlackRock and State Street again. They're both commingled funds. BlackRock is at 9 basis points all in, and State Street is at 7 basis points all in. And you'll see State Street has both a lending vehicle and a non-lending vehicle. We would recommend that you go with the cheaper option, State Street, and go into the non-lending vehicle. Now, one thing to make sure I disclose about this is that they both run against a equal weighted S&P 500 index. State Street rebalances the equal weighting monthly. BlackRock rebalances quarterly. So they're just a little bit tiny different. I think for what we're trying to achieve here, of more frequent rebalancing is probably closer to what we philosophically want anyway. I wouldn't expect there to be significant performance difference between these funds based on the monthly versus quarterly rebalancing, but that's why their numbers are a little bit different from one another in the packet. Nevertheless, I would go with the cheaper one either way, and that's State Street at 7 basis points and in the non-lending vehicle.
So you need a motion?
I think think you would, yes, yeah.
Then I move we go with the Vanguard, because it's less expensive. And with the weighting,
The equal weight.
the equal weighting, anything else that needs to be in the motion?
So,
State Street.
yeah.
State
State
Street,
Street.
sorry. Did I say Vanguard?
So
State Street, excuse me.
I don't think we need a motion on the Vanguard because they are the current provider.
Okay,
It's just,
just State Street.
the board can just stay there unless there's some objection from any trustees there. I would recommend a motion that Sarah hire State Street for the equal weighted S&P 500 index and choose the non-lending vehicle
Thank you.
with State Street. That would be my recommended motion.
That is exactly what I said.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
For discussion, where is the money coming from?
Oh, well, we're rebalancing, and a couple of your other active large cap managers' allocations will be reduced. And that's all based on that structure work we did before, and the rebalancing, and the allocations based on the previous approved structure.
Any other questions? Okay. Involves money, should we do a roll call?
Ms. Shatmeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Ms. Cavanagh?
Yes?
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
And Chair Jordan?
Yes.
Approved.
One more piece of business with Kellen.
Yeah, and then we have the monthly flash report. When I come back in August, we'll go through the full quarterly performance update, but here's a flash report. Some of your private real estate valuation isn't in yet, and the Boston Partners CIT wasn't in when we ran these numbers. But beside that, all the other numbers are in. For the month of June, assets increased about $2 million from 481 to 483 million. The total funds return was about 44 basis points. That's preliminary. We expect that to change. But this is your fiscal year end. So I think this is going to look pretty good for you. It's up 15.5% for fiscal year 20.
Yay.
Do you call it 2017? Fiscal
Yes.
year 2017. June? Yeah. So, and you happen to have benefited from active management over this time period, meaning the other managers you hired to. So over the year, you've outperformed by about 2.33%. So pretty good performance. And that's coming off of a previous year that wasn't as strong. So that's why the 3-year numbers don't look as good right now, 5%. And then the last 5 years, you're up about 9.5%. We'll go over this in greater detail in the August report, but overall, things are looking pretty good right now. Your managers are doing a pretty good job for you. We'll also help Stan and James with the rebalancing of the index funds to get them to the target weights that you already approved.
As an add-on to Greg's comments there, keeping the focus on the very long run, our longest time horizon over which we have a degree of comfort in the return calculations that we have dates back to 2004. And at the end of fiscal 16, our 12-year rate of return was around 6.86% for that period. Adding in this year's preliminary return, that's going to go up to right around 7.5% over the 13-year period, so.
Right on our rate of return.
So, just thought I'd point that out.
Is it net of costs?
Yes, well, it's net of the investment fees because almost all of our fees are, all of our funds are net returns. So it's not going to be net of association expenses, but it is net of most of our investment fees.
Think how good that would have looked if we didn't have the Great Recession in the middle of it.
Well,
Looks pretty good
So,
regardless.
but that's a preliminary number because this number's preliminary and that was James playing around in a spreadsheet. I'll definitely, Calvin will help us do the real number, so.
We'll be sure to bring that.
Can you bring back those numbers though, including the operational costs?
Net of net.
So we can look at that.
Maybe a side note or something.
Yeah, it's a whole different. Seeing what we can do going back is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I can see that'd be challenging, digging that out, but it would be
It's,
maybe something would be of some use, I think.
the history is the difficult part of it. So,
Do we have anything else?
I think we're all done. Yeah.
So we'll be back in August.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ray.
Good to see
Very
y'all.
good. Thank
Yeah.
you. Super.
Well, James, when you're doing that, as I recall, the actuaries use the last 5 years for investment and administrative expenses. You could do something like that with them? You know, compare somewhat to the
Right.
actuarial report.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to think through that and see what we can do.
Okay, so it brings us to item number 4, monthly financial report, which we have in our packet. You want to highlight?
Nothing to highlight there. I'd be happy to have Stan answer any questions that the board has.
Me too.
Not seeing any red in the report.
Right?
So I guess we just sort of accept it.
There's no action needed if there's no questions. I will, if I may, Mr. Chairman. This is another one. I'll poll the board. Would you like this included in the consent agenda in the future, or do you want it to be a separate item? I know we've talked about that in the past, and there's been a former trustee always wanted this to be a separate item, but it's a former trustee, so I wanted to check with the rest of the board and see what your pleasure is now that you're
He who
different.
shall not be named.
A former trustee.
I think it's fine in consent. I mean, we all look at consent anyway.
We're gonna have Callan here every month anyway, right? And they come every month.
We don't have to have them here every month. We can, but I'm talking about the financial report, not
Right.
the investment report.
Right.
I just think that this is extremely significant, and, you know, I would be okay with it in the consent, but this way, if it's not in the consent, maybe it requires more attention in our process, so I'm okay with it not being in the consent, but again, if anybody has an issue with it, it can always be pulled, so it's not like we're losing something.
I don't mind it being in the consent calendar as long as, you know, if we see anything, we'll pull it. That's fine with me.
It seemed like our former trustees' biggest issues, though, were around I know this was part of it, but the investments, that we should actually look at the investments, and we're doing that.
Yeah.
And so that's, yeah, so it makes no difference to me.
It's awfully nice to see that it's almost $500 million. So I said I'd be happy with it in consent, but I think as long as we realize that we're moving upward,
Yeah.
But that's a big chunk of money.
So the investment report will always be a separate agenda item. I believe that really needs to be a separate agenda item with the monthly update. And whether Callan's here or not depends on what we have on the agenda that month. But the financial report, it's at the board's pleasure. Consent or separate item?
I move that we move the financial report to the consent agenda.
I'll second it.
Okay. All is in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Yeah, it's there. I mean, that's the thing on the consent. Anything we want to pull, we can pull.
Well, as
Yeah.
fiduciaries, we have to
Yeah.
review it before
Oh,
we come
anyway,
to the
right.
meeting anyway,
Right.
so.
Okay, that brings us to item 5, the resolution defining compensation earnable pursuant to government code, etc. Let's see.
Okay.
So it does do with the new contracts.
Yes. You, trustees, you have my cover memo and the proposed resolution in red line format. And for those of you that looked at this before Monday, you didn't see the memo. That was my fault. I forgot to tell Judy that I had a cover memo for each resolution. Hopefully you pulled it up today and saw the memo. There's the explanation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Jeff and I agree this is an absolute, this has to be in. So, and the one thing that I should point out is on the last resolved, making this effective as of July 1, 2017, is a backdating because this pay item started July 2nd for some of these members, but we gave the count, and you'll recall I discussed this last time at the board meeting. That pay item started July 2nd, the payroll is processing today, and we have indicated to the county that that should be in, and that's why we added this date, that as of July 1 to the last, or to the resolve section on page 1. So,
And to clarify, this is not a really discretionary action on our part because it's already built into an agreed upon contract.
it's not, what's in the contract is not discretionary for us, but whether we determine it to be compensation earnable or not, it is discretionary for us. But the advice from legal counsel and the retirement administrator is that it absolutely should be included. So the board could reject that, but then you open yourself up to some risk.
So, this is injected with the 5% regional at item number 559, but there's also deletion there. Was there an actual deletion of a consideration for DSA pay?
So what happened is there was not a new pay code created for the 5% regional. It was the pay code 559 was AA/AS for DSA, and that was renamed to the 5% regional.
Okay.
And this merely changes our resolution to reflect that name change. The 559 was compensation earnable under the prior resolution. We just wanted to be perfectly clear that it is still, with the name change, compensation earnable.
I move we adopt Resolution 2017-01 defining pensionable compensation pursuant to Government Code 31461 for members. Should I keep going, or is that good?
That's good.
That's good.
That covered it pretty much.
Just need the resume.
Come on, someone second it.
I'll second it.
All right.
Okay, any discussion?
I'll just throw out one thing. I don't believe that it's required, and I don't want to set a precedent either personally or for the board, but I'm going to abstain from voting on this, if that's all right. Just under the umbrella of being the president of the Deputy Sheriff's Association, and we're still in contract negotiations with the county. I think I'd rather just not have a say in it one way or another, so I will abstain on this.
Probably roll call. Judy?
Ms. Shatmeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Ms. Cavanagh?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Abstain.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
And Chair Jordy?
Yes, and I'll add that I've had the same legal advice that it was pensionable from another source. Okay. All right, well then we'll go on to item number 6, which is discussion possible action.
So, did you do both resolutions?
No. We only did 2017-01.
So this is for the PEPRA employees.
Oh, is there a separate item for that?
Yes. And again, trustees, you have the cover memo and the resolution. This is a identical treatment. This so 2017-01 resolution that you just approved was for legacy members that have compensation earnable. This is, oh, I put the wrong memo on this.
That's okay.
This is 2017-02, which is pensionable compensation specifically for PEPRA members. Again, this is pensionable compensation. Jeff and I both agree. There is no doubt on this. So,
I move we adopt resolution 2017-02.
A second?
Not seeing any discussion. Judy?
Ms. Shatmeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Ms. Cavanagh?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Abstain.
Mr. Knutson?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
And Chair Jordy?
Yes. Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break.
So actually, before we take a break, if I may, I want to kind of use this opportunity while we're looking at the pay codes to kind of refresh the memories of board members who were here in 2013 when PEPRA passed, and also for those of you who are new. So these pay codes that we looked at today were pretty straightforward and clear. When PEPRA passed, the big part of that legislation was to lower the formulas on a go-forward basis. But another thing that it did was to clarify or limit certain items that up until that time had been pensionable. And for those of you who are on the board may remember, standby pay and on-call, we had very significant discussions about whether those should be included as compensation or not for the legacy, the non-PEPRA members. We even had 2 board meetings on it and a very robust discussion. We talked about how the systems were split throughout the 2037 Act systems, and the board ultimately decided to include it. And what I did was I added a provision at the end. It says further resolve that these determinations by the board may change in the future depending on any changes that the legislature makes or any court decisions. And so we've talked about the Marin case that's pending before the California Supreme Court. And in your update, I just noticed that there's a discussion of the Marin case and this very issue. In fact, the attorneys who presented it called it the Marin case, storm clouds ahead. So in Marin and in 3 other systems, there's a separate lawsuit. It's Alameda, Contra Costa, and Merced. In those systems, there were not only standby and on-call, but other more significant dollar value add-ons that were denied on a go-forward basis for existing employees. And those employee union groups sued, claiming that violated their vested rights. In the Marin County case, the court said, no, that's not a violation of your vested rights. And it actually had even broader language that you may have read some publications calling into question whether the employers on a go-forward basis may even change formulas for current employees, pre-PEPRA, the legacy members. So that's what the Marin case is going to be looking at, the California Supreme Court, and they've specifically said they're going to wait for a decision that's pending in the Court of Appeals on that consolidated case involving the other 337 Act systems. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Maybe it's probably in 2018 we'll get a decision, and depending on what that decision is, we may need to revisit standby and on-call. So I'm just taking the opportunity to kind of refresh our memories, and maybe next year we'll be looking at this issue.
And in general, there are more items on the non-pensionable compensation for the PEPRA, basically.
Correct. Yeah.
And the timeline is sometime in 2018 or?
Well, it's kind of hard to know, but that's my best guess.
I had a quick question just about these resolutions. Is it the pay code that governs or the description in terms of language? Because I noticed some things have changed over time, like the bilingual pay premiums for the county. Do we need to update that table, or can we rely on the pay code?
One of the last times we reviewed this resolution, I did a reconciliation of our resolutions with the pay codes that the county uses, and we updated a lot of the descriptions at that time. And Jeff and I worked through all of those different items to make sure that everything was classified correctly. So I think, now that was before all of the latest rounds of negotiation, and that was probably 6-8 months ago that we did that. So periodically, when the resolutions come up, we do a reconciliation to make sure that we're still on board. But we don't do it every time that the resolution comes up. So.
Okay, because I'm just noting, I know the bilingual pay has changed on here for
Okay.
what it is, so I don't know if we have to revisit that.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff, for the update.
Sure.
Take a 10-minute break now.
Okay. Sorry, Jeff, I forgot.
That's all right.
That's my fault. He told me he wanted to talk about it.
We're on to item 7, which is discussion possible action regarding the budget adoption policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trustees, the budget, by our policy review schedule, the budget adoption policy was due for review in the third quarter of 2017. You have the proposed changes to the budget adoption policy that aren't really changes. It's simply moving a policy statement from the purpose section into the policy guidelines sections, and renumbering and making all of the corresponding edits. I would recommend adoption of the proposed policy, and I'm happy to answer questions.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Okay. We don't need a roll call on this, I don't think. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, now we're on to item number 8, which is discussion possible action regarding the telework policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trustees, you'll recall we've talked about this previously and have gone through a number of efforts to try to get a policy to allow the staff here to telework. I already have that ability under my current contract with the board. We do want to, I believe it's important to expand this and take advantage of technology where we can, and be smarter about what we're doing. So the policy does not, it just directs management to develop a program and make that available on a voluntary basis to our employees.
And so for clarification, issues about the hours of operation for the office, that would be a separate issue for the board to consider. So we're not contemplating changing the hours of the, or at least it's not directly related to this policy.
It's not directly related to the policy. we could, it's hours of operation. I don't know if that's a board decision or a management decision. That's just a question that I would have right off the cuff. You know, I have made decisions to close the office. I advise the board, but I don't ask the board in those instances. But I do not see this impacting our hours of operation at all.
I think Jared was first.
Mine was basically a question on the hours of operation, because there have been times that I've wanted to get a hold of someone and it's been on Friday afternoon, or, I mean, we already have hours of operation that are not huge. So personally, I'd be opposed to reducing our hours of operation more. And I'm not talking about particular instances where the circumstances require, say, Judy and others to be with us during a retreat or something along that line. But I think it's real important for our members to be able to get through here and to talk to someone. And so I'm hoping this won't impact that. But another piece of that is the whole working enhancement for people with disabilities wasn't something that I thought about when we first started talking about this policy. And that's real appealing, because there's some fine people out there who could be a real help as employees over the long range, who by virtue of physical or any other type of disability could not come in. So I'm glad that this is included in part of the policy, and I do support it fully.
If I may address that, Mr. Chairman, I would say I am not in support of reducing our hours of availability to the public at all. That's not something that I would consider. If anything, I would consider going the other direction. And I will say that we have not been very strict on our hours of operation. We have plenty of people that come in at 4:30 or 4:45, and oftentimes the door is unlocked. There is a difference between a member that shows up and a member that calls. We're probably better about observing our hours of operation with the phone than we are with someone who shows up. But it is something that we are thinking about. It's on our staff project list to think about what our hours of operation should be. And do we need to make some changes there? So.
And I talked with James about my concerns. I have concerns as a department head that the employees here are being treated differently than other employees. And I think the employees here are confidential, or
yes, confidential
bargaining unit. I have concerns with SEIU, DSA. I have concerns with others that the county does not have this policy in place, and that the retirement's putting this policy in place before the county. I have concerns with that. So I don't know how anybody else feels about that. I do. That is a valid concern for me. And I don't know about the equity there, where employees here can be treated one way and employees in another office cannot be treated that same way.
A comment. I agree with your concern, but I'm also thinking that this may be an opportunity, sort of almost like a pilot project, see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
not,
a good point.
not have to commit to it for the county until we feel like it's successful here,
Mm-hmm.
that it might be a good option, whereas if it's not successful, they don't have to.
Right, but I still have concerns. Yeah, I still have concerns. Yeah.
Well, I would like to add something, but go ahead, Craig.
Well, I would echo Jerry's thoughts on the hours of operation, and I hadn't considered your concerns until you mentioned them. That, I mean, I could see where that would be an issue. I might make the argument that that we're not creating a precedent, or if that's the right way to look at it, by virtue of the fact that we're a standalone autonomous organization. I don't know, technically from a legal
So
side.
I was actually just whispering to James that, you know, you are the treasurer for the county, but when you're sitting here now, you're the trustee for the Retirement Association. It's a separate independent entity, and I think you have to look at it, is it the right policy for this agency, not what impacts it may have on the county. And frankly, I'm not quite sure that it has legal significance. I'm sure it might have some bargaining significance, but I don't see any legal issues. But obviously, there are practical bargaining issues.
So if I could say, I've spoken to James about this, we talked about this policy 2 years ago, maybe longer.
Mhm.
And we talked, I had a meeting with CO's office, HR, and at one point, they were gonna march right ahead in development, and I saw a draft policy. And for whatever reason, it just has not moved. So there is definitely some thought of making some sort of policy countywide, it just hasn't moved anywhere, and I don't know why.
Actually, the only other thing I hadn't really thought about until right now is when a policy like this gets enacted, I don't know if we talked about it, I don't remember, but you need to check and see if there's a meet and confer requirement. And the interesting issue is we're a separate entity, but our employees are our employees part of the bargaining unit?
Yeah.
That's what my issue is.
Confidential bargaining.
Wow, that's,
Yeah.
that is an interesting
Yes.
question, whether there is a meet and confer requirement. And I think you need to check with county HR on that.
Okay.
Is that something that we had talked about? I may not have thought about it till right now.
But the meet and confer would be with the confidential unit, which is very small.
I strongly support this, and I think that this is a very good place to start it with the county, so that we're dragging Mendocino County into the 21st century. It's more and more and more difficult to get good employees. We have good employees here, they do their work, but I don't think this should be based on just the employees that are here. It should be looked at as what is in the best interest of our members in this board, and I strongly am in agreement on this, and would like to make a motion that we adopt the retirement, the telework policy for MSERA. And I don't know if I need to put anything else in there.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Craig?
Yeah. And I would, again, echo a good chunk of Jerry's comments. Are we open for discussion at this point? The only additional point, and I think the earlier conversations about how far this is, we're taking this from a larger standpoint, I think are somewhat on the side. There is mention here that we look at it every 3 years. Because this is a new policy, and don't get me wrong, I second it because I believe in it, and I think it makes sense, certainly within the confines of this building. And I'm thinking of some of the staff members that could benefit from it, and that we would benefit from it, from their benefit. So I'm 100% in favor of it, but I would like perhaps to maybe put in a sentence there that that we look at it again in a year and not 3 years, because it's brand new. Just so we have this discussion again, at some point, within a reasonable time horizon. So that would be the only addendum that I would propose.
If I may address that, Mr. Chairman. There is, so the policy review, I put in here 3 years, but there is at the very bottom of the first page, direction that management will develop and maintain details and report to the board at least annually on the effectiveness of the program.
There we go.
So I put the 3 years because that's kind of our normal cycle for reviewing policies. But there will be at least an annual report to the board. I don't know if that sufficiently addresses your concern.
That might, I focused in on the 3 year number, okay. So yeah, that's fine, and I would draw my comment.
Go ahead. Patrick?
Oh, okay, well, I am in support of this program. I think it is good, and I would love to see, employees everywhere be able to move more into this. I do have concerns about the fact that the confidential unit includes county and retirement personnel. So the meet and confer, I guess I'm wondering, and this would be a question for Jeff, can we move forward on this without doing a meet and confer with the union? Are we taking any risk? Do we need to bring this back in a month to look at it?
So I'm looking at the bottom of the first page, and under policy guidelines in the second paragraph there, it says MCER management will develop and maintain a document that details the specifics of the program. So this appears maybe as a delegation to the administrator to actually craft the substantive policy. And so that will give James an opportunity to check with HR to see if there is a meet and confer requirement.
Yeah, that was the way I crafted this policy, to be a broad authorization to create the program, and there are a number of documents that will be created. There will be, a document to spell out the guidelines, what's expected. There will be an application that an employee will have to fill out and indicate, what work they think is ideal or within their scope of work is good for telework and what's not, what hours and days they're interested in. And then there's also, there's a safety checklist, there's a training issue, there's a number of pieces to the program that all come together. And I'm not creating all this from scratch, I'm stealing it from other county or other governments that use telework already. So don't think I'm devoting weeks to this process. I have devoted a great deal of time, but I'm not starting from scratch.
Yeah, I'm assuming that whoever might telework would have access to records here through a computer. Are we opening up something that can be as secure as we need it to be?
So everything will still run through county IS, and one of the things that county IS is very strong on is if someone's going to access our network, they need to be on a county device. So we will be looking at providing a county device, a laptop or a tablet or something, for employees that wish to telework. Now, we're also thinking dual purposes, both can it work in the office to help us do some things, as well as being a telework tool. So are we creating opportunities? Are we potentially opening ourselves up to a risk? I would say yes, but we're doing as much as we can to mitigate that risk. Anytime you open up another avenue into databases, there's an increase in risk. We're doing everything we can to mitigate that. Additionally, so much of our stuff, everything we do in Pension Gold is hosted by LRS, which is all external to the county agency. So you could access anyone with credentials to log into Pension Gold, the MCERA Pension Gold, can do that from any computer anywhere in the world. I'm not on that list because I don't have credentials to get inside Pension Gold. I have member credentials, just like anyone that goes through Member Direct, but that's it. So it's a trade-off. I think we're being responsible there with the increase in risk from having access from outside of county hard lines. But I think it's a very minimal increase in the risk.
Richard, yeah.
Just the meet and confer does not be a complicated process. It can be a communication. If they say, oh, good, whatever.
So, one other thing, when you're gone and somebody else is gone, are you guys gonna coordinate so that everybody's not gone at the same
Oh,
time?
yes, absolutely.
And people are on vacation, and
Absolutely.
that's one thing I think about is staffing in an office.
Yeah.
And that is a concern to
Yes,
me.
absolutely. Coverage is, telework is a tool to help us be more effective in what we do. But the number one thing that we do is run the organization. And we have to have someone here and available to meet people that come in the door and to answer the phone. And this is not a one-size-fits-all. There are some jobs within the organization are better suited for telework than others, and some, frankly, are not well suited at all. As a small organization with a small staff, we have so many people wearing a lot of different hats that in my role over here, I really can't telework. But when I'm doing this part of my job, I could telework for that. So, we'll really be thinking through very carefully what we can do, what part of jobs would do well in a telework environment and what part of jobs won't do well. And honestly, not everyone is built, not every individual is well suited to telework. So there's that aspect to it as well. It may be that one person is in a job that is well suited for telework, but the individual is not well suited for telework. So in that case, it's up to the individual to indicate whether they think they can do it or not. So there's a lot of individual factors you have to look at for each application that we would consider.
So back to the security issue, I think that, let's say someone's working on the computer here and has pulled up something on the screen that's confidential, right? There are guidelines as to make sure that no one who just walks in the door sees it, and that could also be part of an at-home situation where that person received training or whatever, is highly aware of the confidentiality issues, so that a family member can't walk by and say, oh yeah, okay. So just things like that. It's a little complicated, but I think
It's definitely, I have a draft of a lot of the program documents. It's still very draft, but it has certainly been addressed in the training component.
yeah.
So,
Okay. We had a motion? Yes.
Yes.
Looks like I'm not seeing any more discussion. So, let's do a roll call, I guess.
Ms. Shatmeyer?
I'm going to abstain.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Ms. Cavanis?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Knudsen?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
And Chair Drury?
Yes. Okay, now we're on to item number 9, which is possible action regarding board work plan.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, and trustees. I'm going to pull up the work plan here on the projector and take a little bit of time to go through all of these projects again. So going back to success rate and delivery of monthly retirement benefits, we're still on track there, have yet to miss. It's like I have said to all the staff, and I think probably all of you, this is the one thing at which we will never fail. I don't care what we have to do, we won't miss that. We will always make sure the benefits get done. Added a new project here, the Historical Benefit Review Project that we discussed briefly last time. Work on that is underway. We're expecting to complete that during the fiscal year, but it is going to be a lengthy project there. Board is still on target with monitoring the strategic plan. Board training, continuing to do that, and we will, for the securities lending presentation today, you'll get some training credit from that as well. Maintaining our policy review schedule, we are on track with that. I feel as though that's working relatively well to keep us on track for reviewing everything as we go. Board elections are upcoming. There's an item that we'll talk about in the administrator's report that we're going to start that very, very soon. Strategic planning offsite, we're eyeball deep in that planning. We do have the dates set, September 13 and 14. I will be bringing you additional details as I get everything finalized. Organizational review, have a deadline on that at the end of the fiscal year. So I had submitted a request to HR to have our positions reviewed to see if they were classified at the appropriate level. The response I received from the HR director is that they are going out to contract with an organization to do a county-wide review, and so they're not accepting any more requests. They're expecting that process to probably take a year, unfortunately. So that's where we are on that.
Question, on that review, are they going to review every single position? Do you have any idea? Was that part of it?
My expectation is that they would review every single position. And that's certainly, while it may not, the response from HR was that they were doing a county-wide review. Didn't say every single position, but a county-wide review. For most of our positions, there's one person in the job category, and it's our employee here. So if you're going to review that classification, you have to review what our people are doing. So the only exception to that may be the Judy as the administrative assistant in the confidential unit. There may be others, but I'm not sure on that one. She may be all alone in that job category. So that's under success rate and delivery of retirement benefits and board being policy-focused governance board and working as a high-performance team. All right. Too far. Second, page 2. There you go. Maintain a 95% client approval rating. We are now working on developing an instrument for assessing client approval. And I am stealing from others that already have client satisfaction surveys in the pension world. The next step there is to implement a process for monitoring that. We are looking at that now. I am 98% certain that we are going to use a tool called Constant Contact for surveying clients. You may have heard commercials about Constant Contact. It's an email marketing platform for small and medium and large businesses, small and medium businesses mainly, where you can reach out to customers. It's really built for marketing, but Santa Barbara County uses it for communication and survey work as well, and they've used it quite effectively.
Is it expensive?
It is,
$25 or $50 a month.
it's 20, it depends on how many contacts you have into it. It's not that expensive. It's less than, at the level we're looking at, it may be $50 to $75 a month. But it will allow us to do a lot of things very effectively. So, yeah, several $100s a year, but it's very, very efficient. So,
Exciting.
and one of the things that Santa Barbara does that really has gotten me excited about it is they do a monthly newsletter to membership through Constant Contact, and it's just, they don't even have to write a lot. They simply give a board highlights of their board meeting, update a few things, press send, and it goes. And it's all email based. It's not hard copies and having to mail and all that. So we're progressing towards that in that direction. It's just a matter of we only have so much time to work on all the different projects that we have because we only have so many bodies. The update the member handbook originally had a deadline of the second quarter of 2017. I have pushed that deadline out to the end of 2018 because of everything else we have going on. And most importantly we have a number of client-related policies and procedures that we need to spell out, clarify, and document. And then we want to update the handbook and push that out. So that's what's happening with that. Joint meeting, still tentatively slated for sometime in 2018. So nothing has started on that. The client presentations, we're still doing those quarterly. We have seen the numbers tail off a little bit in the last two presentations. If that trend continues, we're going to think about what we're going to do on a go-forward basis there. We may move to only twice a year rather than quarterly. But it kind of depends there.
And James, do you think that could be in part because all new county employees have a longer orientation and it includes your video presentation? So they're already getting more knowledge about the benefit than they had 2 years ago.
That could be a factor. I think what is more at play is it's two different populations. The incoming employees get the orientation and broadly generalizing, don't think about retirement for the next 15 years. So they're not the demographic that tends to show up for the Retirement 101 presentations. It's those that have been in the county for 10 plus years that are showing up. It may be that we may have reached a saturation point with members, but I'm not 100% sure of that right now.
And it felt like there was a fear out there too among county employees. And I feel like that's been lifted. I feel like the county employees are not as scared as they were because of some public comments that were being made. So.
It never ceases to amaze me how effective the message can be when I go out and speak that your money's going to be there. And just saying that with some authority, it really kind of helps the clients just calm down. Is everything perfect? No. But we have a plan and we're working that plan to get us to where we want to be. And your money is going to be there every month when you retire. We're not going to run out of money. That just saying that really gives people a great sense of relief. So.
It also, I think, improves employee morale and, dedication to stay. Whereas otherwise it's like, do we need to run away?
Yes.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Happy to do it. The community presentations, the civic group presentations. I need help. I need help getting in front of groups. If you're aware of groups, other than the groups I've already gone and spoken to, have anyone you can suggest I contact, please let me know.
You can go on Sean's radio show.
You could.
I'm surprised he hasn't asked you.
That's an option. I've not been invited there. And the conference presentations still on schedule there.
One question is, if we could have a list of where you have spoken, then we might be able to decide if there were some other places.
It's a very short list. I've been to Ukiah Rotary, South Ukiah Rotary, and the Kiwanis, the Ukiah Kiwanis.
Okay.
Anywhere else, I have not been.
I think places like AAUW, you know how the journal publishes the whole list of voluntary activity groups? It just seems that many of those, like AAUW, meet monthly and would be a really good place
Yes.
to start.
Seroptimus, maybe, if anybody has
Yeah.
a connection there.
Is BPW still in?
They're pretty active.
So,
Ukiah Daily Journal staff.
So we should probably just email you if we.
yes, email me, call me, text me, whatever. Probably better to email so that I have it and don't lose it, forget it. Any contacts you have. I've tried to reach out. You know, when I first developed the presentation, I reached out to every group I could find an email address for. And the only group that I heard back from that I contacted through that was the Ukiah Kiwanis.
And you did the Farm Bureau too, didn't you?
I talked to them before I had the presentation that I'm doing now, but it's a lot of the same material, and that was probably a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So, yes, I've been to talk to them. Okay, so that's the 95% client approval rate and communicating frequently. Moving on, state-of-the-art technology. We had on here a process review of the retirement process. I am reevaluating whether we really need to do this or not with the implementation of Pension Gold. We brought in a lot of, we adopted the Pension Gold process, and my thinking now is we brought in a lot of state-of-the-art processing there. I'm not sure there's a lot of value in us going back and reevaluating the retirement process. So that's may or may not happen, but there are plenty of other things we'll be thinking about there. We're definitely starting to think about the upgrades for board tablets. That's coming. Trying to gather some information now, and then we've got a host of other things we're looking at there. 100% funded by 2040. We will have an actuarial audit. Our expectation there is we will start that process later this year with the RFP and complete that either in the first or by the second quarter of next calendar year and get that report. Risk assessment, we'll be discussing that during the offsite and what that will entail and what we'll think about that. Investing strategically, the property maintenance plan is in progress. We have a number of projects that are we have 2 projects that are currently out for bid in the parking lot. And the security on the covered patio for Suite A. Both of those are out for bid at the moment. After we get those projects moving, we'll think about the 3rd project, and then we've also got to think about what we're going to do with landscaping. I'll leave that. So we just completed the equal weighted index search, and then I added 2 new projects here. Investment belief statement is something that a lot of institutional investors are moving towards, is adopting a set of beliefs. And there's a great deal of power in that in helping us document what it is we truly believe, what are our underlying assumptions. So that's something that I think we want to consider next year. And then the last item here is investment consultant RFP. Last year, the board directed that we would do an RFP at the end of 2018. We'll start that process there. But one of the things we want to do before then is think about what the options are for an investment consultant. Because there are a menu of choices out there that we can consider. So we'll be developing some ideas on to discuss what the various options are for an investment consultant engagement. That is the update on the work plan. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, to me, this is a really concise and helpful presentation or format that you've developed, and it's nice to see all the progress.
It's nice to see a work plan.
Yeah.
And the next time you see this, I would expect it will look very, very different after the offsite. So,
We'll come up with all kinds of
Oh, no.
We'll flip that on its head.
Yeah.
and you really don't want to see the staff work plan because it's dwarfs this plan. We've got a lot of projects, but we'll talk about that during the offsite. So.
Okay, that brings us to item number 10, which is the SACRS 2018 legislative platform.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just present this to you. Thank you. This came from SACRS. If the board has any interest in proposing any legislation for SACRS endorsement, you have the timeline here of when things have to be done. I just present that to you and then throw it out and take direction.
Hey, Ms. SACRS, anything?
I don't currently have anything, no. But I think it's something that we should think about and possibly, if there is something we have, what is the timeline, it's September?
September 5th is the deadline to submit a request for legislation. So we only have one more meeting before that deadline.
So we could bring it to the next meeting if there were something, right?
Yes.
And this is, SACRS meets every year, and so this is, I'm assuming this is their schedule each year.
Yes, this is their schedule each year.
We've been meeting every month.
Well,
You're saying the submittal.
Yeah.
the legislative process
Yeah.
is every year for SACRS, yes.
So one thought would be, I don't know if anybody has any specific ideas, but we will have a 2-day retreat, or,
Yeah.
so
But that's
maybe-
after the deadline.
Well, for this year, but I'm saying that
Yes.
there might be something that comes through our workshop, our 2-day retreat,
Right.
that we then have a little time to refine in advance of the following years.
Okay. Yeah. I would say if there's an interest in proposing anything for the 2018 legislative session, we need to know the idea now so that I can have the time to do the research and prepare a proposal and bring it back to the board at the August meeting for consideration and adoption. If you come up with an idea at the August meeting, you're going to have to delegate all that authority to the administrator and legal counsel to take that and put it into a form that's digestible and get it into SACRS in time without the board's having an opportunity to review what we're submitting. So, and I will say, after the August board meeting, almost all of my time is going to be directed towards preparing for the offsite. So I'm going to have very little time after the August board meeting to get this done. So
could we do it electronically, send you something prior to the August meeting?
my concern is if I get one trustee that says, hey, I want you to prepare this proposal, then I no longer work for the board, I'm working for 10 different
Could
trustees.
you poll it? Do a poll?
I'd look to legal counsel.
Outside the meeting.
Can I pull board members outside of the board meeting to see if they are generally supportive of me doing some work on something?
That doesn't sound right.
Give me a little more detail. I mean, if it's a one-way communication and you're not bouncing back and forth, it's,
So the sense I'm getting is no one has a specific idea that they want to throw out that we consider at this point. But if someone comes up with something next week and sends me an email and says, I want you to, I think we should consider doing this, and then I ask each trustee, are you okay with me spending time on this?
you're in a gray area. I err on the side of not doing that. I mean, it just doesn't sound transparent to me. It sounds like something that people would want to hear about it.
So maybe we'll focus on next year. It sounds like it's not doable, is what it sounds like to me.
It may be, if there's an idea that comes up next month that's doable, it's just, how hard are you gonna ride your horse?
Yeah.
So, go, Richard.
I guess two things come up. It's the issue, the timeline for this particular issue, and the other one is a board member saying, I want you to research 25 different things. And the second part of that is like we should develop a policy that, and I know one policy I can recall was that a board member would get like 4 hours of the CEO's free time, so to speak, on a project before they had to go to the full board to get
That's still in
more
fact,
time. Yeah, and that's important. But I guess for this issue, if any board member has an issue, they might want to do that research, especially if he's got himself tracked into something.
So the idea that I did have, and it doesn't need to be necessarily done this year, but I would still be interested in revisiting a legislative solution to the COLA issue. I remember when this came up before, we talked about how there was the California CPI, which currently we couldn't use. And that would have, having that option for the different systems might resolve it. And then we're not faced with having to revisit the COLA every 5 years or whatever plan. And we're not the only system impacted by that. So if there could be an option laid out for the rural counties in the 37 Act, which right now don't have one, I feel like it would save the board from, dealing with, this issue over and over, because I just still don't feel that it's going to go away. I think it could resurface in the years to come.
Well, that's a specific issue.
But I also realize the timeline for this year is short. I don't know that it's imperative that we work on it this year. I realize the staff has a lot of obligations, but that's something that I think would be worth exploring.
Well, and we are good on that for, 2 or 3 years? On the COLA issue? We're not bringing that back here. Yeah, so that would actually be an excellent item maybe for next year, and that would give us plenty of time to float it. I mean, we could do it, I don't know if we'll do it this year or not, but there's not an urgency at this end.
No.
Because if we have 4 years before it, for us anyway. Because this is all pretty involved. I mean, you have to go present to the legislative committee, and it's an involved process to go through on these ledge committees, and so it may not be something we want to tackle this year, but I think we need to make sure that gets documented, because we talked about that and I totally forgot about that.
Right.
And one of the other issues that we talked about, and it kind of we threw out there was about alternates, as far as
Because legally, we don't have the option.
that like Richard is Tim's alternate, and I actually could bring my assistant treasurer tax collector. But other than that, there's not a lot of alternates, and there was some talk about that, particularly for the board, I think the 4 board appointed members. That would be another thing we may, we maybe don't want to tackle that this year, but that may be another thing that we were throwing around. But it feels like we do need to document these things, because they kind of tend to, I was thinking about that one, I was not thinking about the COLA. But I think both of those down the road may be something that if we want to pursue it, and it may be helpful to pursue more than one, because you have to put a lot of effort into it as far as presenting your items and that kind of thing, and wrapping it up and doing 2 or 3 at one time, if that's what we want to do.
Put it on the project list.
There you go. Yeah.
Is this an editable document?
It is now. It's in Word.
It's a great tool. Did you
Oh, that's pretty handy.
create that, or is that something that is available?
I created this previously,
Okay.
so this is a tool I use in a number of different facets.
That's great.
Are we thinking 18 or 19 here?
Maybe we're kind of talking 19. The good thing is the legislature meets every year.
Right. And if they could meet in 2018 too, but we could get it done by September 2018.
Well, and when it gets closer, I mean, we could even
Yeah.
create a committee if that's what we need to do to try to formalize everything. But this is good because this will give us an opportunity to make a list as the year's going on, which we've never had before.
Okay.
Thanks.
So just to be clear, we're not going to propose anything for the 2018 session, but we'll put it on the work schedule and be thinking about proposing this for the 2019 session.
Okay.
Okay.
Just a question, do they go through this again before the May conference? Or is this only in the fall?
So my understanding is that they start this process in the fall so that the legislative committee at SACRS has sufficient time to review and work through, and once a proposal is submitted, there may be an opportunity for back and forth between the legislative committee, the SACRS legislative committee, and the requesting system. And it does get presented at the fall conference. I think it's presented at the fall conference.
Really?
Or-
I'm confused because I know that we got, like, at the SACRS board meeting, we get an update every meeting.
Right.
And I know that the spring conference, there was a whole section on all the legislative suggestions, basically. So I don't know
Fall.
Well, this document talks about the fall.
The fall, yeah.
Yeah.
if it is the fall.
I-
Okay.
If the process works ideally, it gets presented to the SACRS membership at the fall meeting for approval,
The platform.
the legislative platform. If the process works ideally. The problems there have been in the recent past is there were ideas, but there was not legislative language that was drafted in time for the fall conference. So that's why I think they're going to a little bit stricter deadlines to get everything done in advance of the fall conference. Approval by SACRS membership to take to the legislature opening in January. So.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the retirement administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trustees, you have the report before you. I'm just going to highlight a couple things. As I've mentioned, we are finalizing logistics for the offsite. You all have a copy of this lovely book. StrengthsFinder can be a very powerful tool, and the important part of this, you don't have to read the whole book. It is a short book, but what's important about this is at the very back of the book, inside this little sealed component here, is a code that allows you to go to the StrengthsFinder website. You enter the unique code inside of that little envelope, and you'll take an assessment. It'll take around 30 to 40 minutes to take a test. essentially. And what this does is it identifies your top 5 strengths in order. So there are 33 or 34 individual strengths that, and this is all put together by Gallup, so they know a little bit about polling. They identify your top 5 strengths in order, and then you'll get a report that walks you through what each of those mean. I'd like for all of you to do this and get me the results by the next board meeting. And this will be a component that we are going to touch on during the offsite. Okay? Any questions on that?
Once we find out, what are we gonna do with, what are you planning to do with that information?
That remains to be seen.
Blackmail us, oh, no.
Yeah.
It's one of those Facebook things.
This is
these usually don't have wrong answers, right?
no, they don't have wrong answers. There are no wrong answers.
You can't
This is
fail.
not going to tell us, what it's going to tell us is what you're good at. Okay? And the whole concept here that I think is very important is strengths-based management. Okay? While I don't manage you manage me. It's the concept behind strengths-based management. If you think back to kind of old industrial style management that got done to you once a year during a performance review, it was, here's what you did wrong, and here's what you're going to do to get better at those things that you're doing wrong. Strengths-based management kind of flips that entire thing around and says, here's what you're good at. Here's what you're built to do. How can we tailor your job to play more to your strengths and less to your weaknesses? Or what should you be doing differently? If you're really a numbers person and a hardcore introvert, but you're working as a receptionist, you've got a mismatch there. Can we move you somewhere else or take some of your job functions from the introvert and give them to the extrovert type of thing? So here we've talked about functioning as a high-performing team. I think it's important if you're going to work well together as a team to know what each other's strengths are. So that'll be something we'll be bringing in to the offsite. The appraisal, got an appraisal. The building is worth more than what we bought it for. Yay!
Should be.
James, just to refresh my memory, what was it appraised
What
at
was the last one, yeah?
previously?
The last appraisal was at purchase, and it was
6 something, right?
it was I believe it was $897, but I'm going from memory there, and we all know how dangerous that is.
And that was a decade ago.
Yes. So,
It's 898, right?
a little bit more than that. Okay. We've implemented a new policy outlining the process and the requirements for someone who's going to receive a service retirement. Largely that is just clarifying and trying to put it in somewhat plain English for our retirees, what they have to do to retire on a service retirement, what the deadlines are, and making it very clear that we're going to follow the law. We've been a little forgiving at times, allowed someone to bring in a retirement application, and they bring it to us today, but they wanted to retire a week ago. The law is very clear that the earliest they can retire is the date we receive their application. So just tightening up all of those things and trying to make it very, very clear what the law says and what we have to do, and that we're going to do what we have to do. So that's, we're working on pushing that out to membership. We've updated the 101 presentation to include that information now. Make it very, very clear that There are deadlines involved.
I was looking at it, trying to figure out, what changes have been made, and anything else besides that issue, or
The other thing that I would say may be a little bit of a change is the retirement date for the conversion of accrued sick leave to retirement service credit. That has been maybe not strictly adhered to, but it's clear from the 37 Act that you have to separate at retirement in order to have the accrued sick leave convert to retirement credit. What's not being clear is, what does that mean? Can I retire 2 weeks later? 3 weeks later? A month later? What we've said here is you have to retire the day after your last pay period in order for that to happen. So.
And that's something that's required in the 37?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
gotcha.
It is. Separation at retirement for that to happen is required in the 37 Act. So.
I don't have it in front of me, but it was not clear to me, the part about enhancing retirement by paying, like, it's kind of like spiking. Is that, there's something in there about enhancing retirement by, like, paying.
The vacation payout.
Is that what you know?
Because sick leave was converted, it was never cashed out, right?
No, there's something.
You can do, well, you can sell vacation.
Service
to up to a
credit,
certain
a
amount.
service credit purchase.
You never got paid for sick leave.
Yeah, you got the time, you got the,
That's what
it was,
I'm saying.
yeah. But, and you always had vacation, you could sell like at two ends of the fiscal year and end up kind of having a higher retirement, if you get vacation.
I guess.
There's a little blurb about the reciprocity, but that's,
Okay.
not much there.
Well, I do have a question about, like, I think with PEPRA, there's something called spiking where you get paid, like you're planning to retire, so you get put into a position to get paid more for the last 3 years. That's very difficult to prove. So, and that's not even.
That's not covered here at all. We do have, we have a separate policy, and I can't remember it's something related to the determination of, what is that policy called?
I mean, it's in part discussed in our, in the resolution, because that lays out, what's pensionable and what's not.
Right.
Assessment and determination of compensation policy. And under that policy, staff and the board have the ability to review cases
So
in
that,
which someone may have attempted some sort of pension spiking.
that would be a process that it would not happen automatically. It would be something that if there were concern, it would be brought to the board for review.
So I just pulled up the policy, and there's a staff review, assessment, and determination portion of this, where we have to look at a number of things, and then the staff makes a determination, and then the member, then there's a section 3 review of staff determination, I believe can appeal the staff's determination to the MCERA board.
And we had that issue come up, maybe somebody will remember better than me, maybe not quite exactly this context, but there was somebody who brought an issue, I don't know if it was before James's time, but there was an issue that staff made a determination and they brought it to the board and the board agreed.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly.
I was just interested
Remember?
in the process.
About the
It was
pension, what's
related to
pensionable?
something maybe pensionable. I know there was a staff determination benefits
I know
related.
there was a
Came
thing
to
on
the board.
reciprocity that came to the board.
Or maybe that's what.
Yeah.
That's what it was, yeah, I remember that one, I don't remember the details, but I remember.
So PEPRA doesn't allow vacation, but the regular county employees, so PEPRA they get it.
Okay. Elections, like I said earlier, are upcoming, and I've listed all the critical dates there. And we're still waiting for the Board of Supervisors to make an appointment to our 6th seat, and the 5th and 9th seat, which are Jerry and the chair, come up later this year as well. So, two things I would like to add that are not on the administrator's report. We are working, so we took photos last time, we're working on adding those to the website. We would like to also have your biography. For those of you that have submitted your biography, thank you very much. If you haven't yet submitted your bio, please get it to Judy by the end of the month, or I'm going to make one up for you.
That sounds interesting.
I'd like to see what you come up with.
Is that a
Yeah,
threat?
right.
After we do this, right?
I'll give you my mom's phone number.
Mine started sounding like an obituary.
So please get those in as soon as possible, so that we can get all of that updated, provide some more information about the trustees to our members who do have questions. And I'm not sure everyone knows, it was a member request that started us down this road. A member suggested, why don't you have this available? Frankly, I didn't have a good answer. Because we haven't done it, was my only answer. So we are moving in that direction, and we want to get that out there. Next, I sent an email a number of weeks ago with a survey. 2 of you have done that survey. Everyone else, please go do it. It's related to the offsite. I know I sent the email because 2 of you did it. So
Can you resend it to those who?
resend.
I
No,
don't remember.
You sent it to this address as well?
I sent it to both.
I remember you wanted to meet with us all. Was it in that same email?
Nope, different email.
Okay.
Okay.
Who's done it?
I'm not gonna.
Since I am
Pat.
always late, I'm gonna pat myself on the back.
You-
I was 1 to 2, so just for the record. I actually did something early, or on time.
Yeah, I think a resend would be really good.
Yeah, I
And
think
could you
so.
resend a bio too? I think I have that somewhere, but you sent your copy of the bio, huh? Just to have it at the top of my thousands of emails. Oh,
2,000 words, right?
You want 2 paragraphs, right? You want a couple paragraphs?
I want as much as you want to say about yourself.
When I was born, I was very young.
I was born when I was very young. Is that what you just
That's
said?
what he said.
Lastly, no one's really noticed it, but we have a new logo.
I was waiting.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So
That is,
we
Did you
are.
create that?
I did not. Nora did.
Laura did a beautiful job.
So we have the M serum, and we also get the right computer here. We have the longer version with the full association name there. So
We're not gonna get sued for any copyright violation, are we?
I don't believe
It's
so.
not anybody's logo, all right?
We've not put that out publicly yet.
Just making sure.
Yeah. So sort of the 2 mountains sort of have the M look
Yeah,
to
and then
it, which
the
we really liked.
slope looks like a
Yeah.
C, and then the
Yeah.
one looks like an A. I think that's a really good
It's
one.
just a weird tail.
So, and I'm a big fan of the blue. I like the blues because it conveys, a lot of things.
Strength and authority.
Strength and authority and trustworthiness, integrity, all that kind of good stuff. And the green ties in with money
and all that kind of stuff, so.
The bottom is like the Vikings.
Oh, great, now you ruined it.
You know, it's
Um,
very similar. Yes.
So, that is all that I have, unless any of you have questions for me.
What makes you think it looks like the New England Patriots emblem on their helmet? And I think the bottom part kind of looks like the Minnesota Vikings. I could be in trouble.
I think it's pretty clear here.
It's, you know, we wanted, oh, that does remind me of one other thing I wanted. We wanted something for us, because, you know, for so long we've used, as a logo, we've simply used the county seal. And I really think we need to get away from that and kind of identify ourselves as our own organization. Along those lines, going back to the discussion last month around the website, I am exploring some options with the vendor that built the county's website for us to do our own thing. Still under the county's umbrella, but have something that better suits our needs and does what we want. I'm aware that the library is doing something similar. They're building what's called a sub-site. It's still on the county's contract, but it's designed specifically for their needs. I'm exploring some options there to see if maybe we want to do that as well. So, but I'll be gathering some information and coming back to the board to talk about that to see if you want to spend money on that. So now I'll stop.
Okay, so that brings us to general board member discussions.
I have a question on the retirement, service retirement policy. On the retirement benefit payment, it says if a person retires on the first of the month, they'll get their first check at the end of that month. If they retire any other day, they get their first check at the end of the following month. Will that first check be partial, the first partial month and the full second month?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's not very clear in here for somebody reading that.
Oh, okay.
Any other comments on that? Okay. So board member, general discussion, any items people want to just?
I'm not going to put either you or Jerry on the spot, but we hope that since the two of you are up for re-election or reappointment, that you'll come back.
We hope so too, huh, Dan?
Well, usually they just stay as long as they want to, right?
Well, there's some, I don't know what it is, right, but there's some mechanism for the board rep to change over time, or is that
Sure,
just
I mean, I think it's really the interest of the,
of
the
the
other board
other
members.
particular, yeah, well,
When are you up for election to your board position? Board of Supervisors?
Was re-elected a year ago, so 3 more years.
They'll leave you on.
I think so. I don't know that there's
Let's
too
say
many
unless you
people
want
dying.
to do it.
Unless you went off, yeah.
It takes a strange mind to love this kind of policy, but some of us love this kind of policy.
But you guys are first. Are you guys, are they first or are you first? Or all, you
It's
guys
the
are.
same time frame.
Oh, so who's all up? I saw that in there. You two
And me.
and Catherine. And
you're
then-
elected, correct? By your
Retired,
then-
we're both elected by the
Yeah,
board.
and then you guys are after that, yeah. Yeah.
I would hope you do stick around well.
Yeah.
I felt left out.
But not me. Yes.
You're up for re-election as well?
yeah.
Well, okay,
Oh, that's
yeah,
why
I'm just dropping the
that's
ball
why I'm
here.
playing.
I hope you all stay.
So these three are first and then these two, it
Okay.
sounds like?
Well, I was thinking of the board folks.
Whatever.
Okay, well, I guess at one end.
Anyway, yeah,
That was cool. I appreciate it.
We have an extra.
Okay, on that, we'll adjourn at 1 minute after 11.
Yes.
Thank you.
Look at that, thank you. Okay, that's My meetings are all very nice.
You got homework.
I know.